I use this slide actually just to depict what's going on around what's happening with service providers. These are all things they're dealing with. You know, how do they get to segments? How do they get to different revenue models? How do they create differentiation? We talk about all the technology. There's a couple quick thoughts before our panel, and you guys can come on up right now. So here's our panel. What I find interesting, first of all, at a high level, is that when we start getting in telecom into 4-letter acronyms, things are getting serious. So we're there now. We went from 3-letter acronyms to 4-letter acronyms, which to me means a whole lot more stuff's happening. But also, I think you'll see some new technology, new business models that have to be developed. And what we'll start with, again, let me just quickly name the panelists. I'll let them speak as they have a presentation they'll go through quickly. From Deutsche Telekom, Jean-Claude, Senior VP of International Delivery. We have Travis Ewert from now CenturyLink, Senior VP of Global Network Software Development, and Steve Fisher from Zayo, who's the CTO for the Enterprise Division. Jean-Claude is going to go first, and I'll actually just let them kind of do their own intro of their company. They'll each do about an 8-minute presentation, and then we'll go through just a few questions, and then you'll be off to lunch. So I think we have a very impressive panel from service providers that cover the globe pretty much. So I will let Jean-Claude start first.
Thank you. So we're going to switch gear a bit from the passionate colleague. For a second, I thought he was going to take a firewall out of his pocket and program it in front of us. That was very impressive. And talk a bit about telco and what we're doing in the telco world, at least in Europe. DT, just a quick background, is the largest telco in Europe with presence in 14 countries. And obviously with presence in the US as well. T-Mobile in the US is part of the group. And one of the responsibilities I have in my role is to build a telco cloud. And we put a case together on this a couple of years ago. And the case was not only about creating synergies amongst the different countries where we're present. A lot of it was more about agility. It was more about transforming the company from NT to more IT, from static monolithic development to continuous integration and continuous development. So the business case has many, many facets, and it's being tracked at the highest level in the company by our CFO and our CEO. So what we've done so far, we built a network for our cloud with back-end data centers in 3 countries, in Hungary, in Poland, and in Athens, that is ongoing. And then we're building 2 front-end data centers in each country. And the reason for that is several, just to mention 1 or 2. We were planning ahead for mobile edge computing. So we don't want everything to be built and hauled back to the core. At the same time, there are some legalities on crossing borders with data. I mean, EU may be one entity when it comes to physical borders, but when it comes to data and privacy, and data privacy security, there are some constraints and some things that we need to respect as we build networks. And also, we have some countries that are not part of EU, so they have different regulations from the rest of EU. And the aim is to have full redundancy. Right now, we've managed to connect the data centers internally via the SDN technology. And the next step is to figure out how to connect these data centers across the continent in the best way to create geo-redundancy for the long haul. And we've done several, so we built several services already that are cloud-based. We started with something easy like messaging. As you can see on the slide, we wanted to walk before we could run, because one of the biggest challenges we have is to change the mindset and the skill set of people from sort of network legacy to forward-looking cloud-based infrastructure and services. And we built things like messaging, Volte, Cloud CPE, and in 2018, we're gonna focus on more sophisticated platforms like TV. And then beyond that, we're looking at the evolved packet core for mobile networks and IMS. And if you ask why the timing has to do with availability, not only of cloud interoperability and technologies, but also availability of these platforms to be cloudified. It's one of the biggest challenges our vendors or suppliers have to keep up with the clock to ensure that we have these platforms cloudified in time. So when it comes to the virtual stack, we've had quite a bit of experience in the stack. And when it comes to orchestration, which has been one of the main themes in this forum, we feel that the vendors have probably transposed the multi-vendor challenges from legacy to the cloud. So we see that interoperability is not there. We've decided to go for a multi-vendor stack, not a single stack from one vendor, because we don't want the vendor lock, and we want scalability in the long term. Also, we've noticed that lack of standardization is putting us a bit behind time, specifically in the orchestration area and in the OSS. Using a legacy OSS to manage a cloud environment is not the way forward. So we're trying to find our way there, and obviously any interaction is beneficial for us on this topic. Automation is also key for us. One of the business case aspects I talked about is not only to create synergies and to come together, but also to have faster time to market. And right now, onboarding takes weeks, sometimes months. And that's not the point of spending on this technology or moving in this direction. So definitely automation is key going forward for us. And it goes without saying, moving assets, moving technologies, moving services, and rearranging networks across 13 countries in Europe is not a trivial thing. So there's a lot of forums and industries coming together like this one, and we're trying to participate in most. And yet we found ourselves sometimes somewhat alone trying to figure out things. So what we expect from this forum, any industry forums or any industry initiatives, that we work together on simplification and really share best practices and push ahead with standards rather than create yet another set of standards. Not that we don't want to work with multiple standards, but it makes it difficult for our suppliers to be compliant, to interoperate with different standards and work with us. There's two key elements or two sort of messages that are takeaway for a forum like this. Is the lifecycle automation is very, very important going forward. And this has to do with building the functions, onboarding, building applications on top, service activation, and then operations, which goes into the next item. We're building a NOC in Romania, in fact, to manage this telco cloud. And we definitely need a lot of interactions to figure out how we do this going forward in the best way. Managing a cloud network with legacy platforms and legacy tools is not the way forward. So there's definite opportunities for the industry, for our peers and colleagues in the industry and the suppliers to really work in those two areas, the life cycle automation and the next generation telco operations.
So I just want to go through today a little bit about what's the Zayo journey. What have we gone through as we've embarked on how do we orchestrate services, and what are the services that we've embarked on. So we really look at this foundation. Really, what is our development process? How do we organize our teams so that we can move this journey forward? What is that core automation and orchestration that we're using across our elements? And what is that underlying core network architecture? So we'll go through these a little bit. But this is how we sort of view what we're doing. So I want to talk a bit about sort of our journey in the development process and how we've organized our organization. I think this is, for us, one of the more compelling things for us to figure out. How did we organize our world so that we could actually change who we were from an organization, to be able to change from network engineers and software developers living in their own silos. So let's talk through this a little bit. So we have made that shift, right? We have combined our organization in a way that we now build teams, cross-disciplinary teams, that work on, and the team sits in a hierarchy of a team environment with agile development processes, and it really is made a huge change for us to figure out how do we organize teams so that we have a classic network engineer and a software development staff and all of the parts and pieces that you really need to be able to automate and orchestrate the network and network resources. And then we did a couple of things that I think were very helpful for us in organizing teams. We did two things. We took this sort of classic agile approach, and we broke up what is the classic agile product owner into two separate roles. So what we found was we really needed two strong people to lead what the vision was for what people were developing. Right? One, we call a technical product owner, someone that is really technically driving what are the right solutions and what are we doing from a technical perspective. And then also, we created this role which was the, what are we really working on? How are we really keeping our stakeholders, our customers, do we really have a vision of the business value we're bringing? And bringing those two roles together to prioritize, to work through with the team, how do we actually bring vision into what they're developing? I wanted to talk a bit about our journey. So we'll kind of talk where we started and where we live a bit in the orchestration journey. So, we really started with developing all of our own customized tools, right? It was a custom developed organization. We have lots of CLI-based automation tools that go out and interact with network elements and change them and modify them. We were focused internally, like looking at ourselves, saying, how do we simplify the service delivery process? How do we simplify and automate for ourselves? And then we did simple things for customers, right? And this is where we'll start talking about what is the change that we really see in the last probably 12 to 18 months and really ramping up in the last 6. We did simple things, right? How do we change bandwidth on a customer portal? Things that, we sort of drove our customer to, hey, use our tool and interact with our tool in the way in which we want you to interact. And it worked, it was great, but it is sort of the place we're starting to see where we need to evolve a bit, giving more tools to our customers in different ways. And then the other thing that we spent a lot of time on is how do we bring the compute, storage, network resources, how do we bring our network and those compute resources together, right? So we deployed several what we're calling network virtualization centers, sort of integrated compute and storage resources, cloud nodes into that network infrastructure so that we have places to do this work and to virtualize and move workloads around. So now let's talk about how we're evolving, right? So what we did, right, the early days of automation were homegrown pieces. We've really started to embrace the open source projects and really starting to embrace how do we collaborate more holistically in the community to bring tools to all of us and use those resources of those tools. We're starting to integrate those homegrown CLI-based automation tools with NetConf so that we can use these open source NetConf tools, but still have a bit of the CLI-based control that we got accustomed to. And then we've seen huge changes from what our customers are asking us for. I guess what I would say is both what our end user enterprise customers are asking for and what we have from a partner perspective. And so let's talk about those a little bit. So from an end user perspective, our end users are really asking us from a large enterprise perspective, how do they interact with us better, right? How do they take their tools and truly use APIs that we expose to them to interact with that data? And 6 months ago, people started asking us. Now we get the question from most of our large enterprises on a weekly basis, right? What APIs do you have? What can I get from a performance perspective? How do I get fault information to my NOC, and so I know what's going on in your network? How do we modify services and change more dynamically than we had been in just giving end user portals? And then from a partner perspective, we've seen a lot. I think all of us as large service providers have seen a lot of activity from a partner perspective in cloud exchanges, cloud areas. How do we get people's workloads to those cloud service providers? And those cloud service providers really want us to interact with them in a better way. And so we spend a lot of time in how do we interact with those cloud providers? How do we enable those services? How do we enable our network to those cloud service providers for other data centers that want to exchange traffic or move workloads around? And that's where we probably spend most of our API time right now, because it's the fastest moving area for us at the moment. And then, I don't not want to talk about challenges. This isn't easy. I think we kind of sit here. It's great to sit in these rooms and you listen to the equipment vendors and you're like, oh my God, this is great. We look at these demos. None of that really works. I mean, it's hard. Multi-vendor platforms, firmware inconsistencies, like everything. Like, yeah, if you put it in your lab, I can make magic happen, right? But in the real network, right, and Zayo, 42 acquisitions, I think, right? We've got quite a few networks, and those, normalizing and making those things really work, it's a lot of work. It's exciting and it's getting easier. It gets easier every day, but it's hard. So don't, go back and think, oh, well, I was at MEF and everybody's doing this and it's easy. It's not easy. This is important. How do we really all support, legacy devices, right? We all have lots of them and we don't get to just, buy new and throw them away. And so, spending time on how do we really support legacy devices and integrating those is important. What happens when automation breaks? So this for me and my team is, they get me to I harp on them quite often about this. So we all sit around, and I'll give you my, 2-second speech that I give my team. We get a little caught up in automation needs to be end-to-end, everything needs to happen end-to-end, and we do that, and sometimes we want to evolve our product, we want to change something, we buy a new company, and something breaks. This is, my advice to my team is always, hey, make sure that we compartmentalize the pieces we're automating so that when something breaks, there's always a way to make it work in a physical manner. Because as we move through time, it becomes more and more challenging to evolve as quickly as we need to when we have so many complexities. And if everything is trying to be automated end to end, we sort of lose sight of adding value in all of the right places that we can. Global expansion, right? Zayo, we're in many countries. This is a trick and a challenge. And I put two things, right? Standards are certainly a challenge for us in making sure that we have a standard way in which we can communicate to other carriers and in other countries, in our country, but I don't want to underestimate the compliance issues are real, right? And they're hard, right? How do we keep traffic, keep data sovereignty requirements? Where can we move workloads? Where can't we? In an automated world where we want to move workloads around, there are rules that we all have to pay attention to that aren't easy, and us all working together to make sure we have ways in which we can do that and work with equipment vendors and manufacturers and everyone to make sure that we understand what we can do and how we support those data sovereignty requirements and compliance requirements. And then fear of automation. This is probably one of our largest challenges at Zayo, and that is how do we get our operational teams to embrace what we're doing? How do we get a lab to mimic reality, right? We have a lot of dynamics, right? How do we test this stuff and make sure that when we let it loose, right, our operations teams feel good about what we're doing and aren't afraid? And so we spent a lot of time working on how do we integrate those operations teams into the development process? How do we make sure we give them tools to pay attention to what's going on as we're automating? Because there's that fear of magic can turn service up, but magic can also turn it down, is real and something to pay attention to.
The title, sum of the parts. So I think it was Aristotle years and years ago, the whole is greater than the sum of the parts. So we're going to coin a new acronym here this morning, SOTP, because I'm going to say it over and over again. And SOTP, for what I want to talk about here, is going to take 3 shapes and forms. One, is this NUCO? Is this bigger, broader CenturyLink? That's going to be a piece, and I'll give you some nuggets there that maybe you haven't heard from some of our talking points in the last 10 days. The second piece is this global connected Ethernet exchange. And what we're super proud of, what we've been a part of, going way back in time with MEF as a combination of a TW Telekom, a Quest, a Level 3, a CenturyLink. All these families now come together that were heavy-duty MEF supporters from the beginning of time. And then the third one, an interesting one, and back to services, is if you look at a SOTP, or some of the parts by way of services, how do you get to unique innovation when you start to piece those together in a different way to get to innovation through the parts that already existed? So I'll give you some examples there. So my buddy Shuttle, who was here up here this morning, he covered some of this, but I'll just give you the nuggets as it relates to this audience and from a MEF perspective. So, our Ethernet platform, we're in 290 markets, 39 countries across North America, APAC, LATAM, EMEA. That's part of the reason, by the way, we did well again last night, is we just have such a geographic reach and have the ability to apply for some of these other geographies. So hats off to the team. That was a good showing. And the other thing to cover here that's not on this slide is, what we end up with as a go-forward company is we end up with, and we said this before even as a Level 3, one of the biggest internet backbones, if not the biggest. Now add CenturyLink into the mix. And what we'll be able to do there by way of more and more traffic, whether it's on the consumer side of things or more of the corporate or enterprise side of things going OTT, what we'll be able to do uniquely just by way of where we sit and fit in number of hops and peering transit and all those things to manage that traffic more like private, and at the same time, expansions of our CDN asset, which is the second largest out there. I mean, there's a lot of goodness that's going to come from that, but the one that warms my heart maybe the most is the focus on data analytics. So the bigger you are, the more scale you have, the more data that you're going to see, consume, ingest, collect, analyze. Everything we'll do with that to get to real-time capabilities facing the customer or more business intelligence for unique customer experience. And I told Shuttle earlier, he gets the A+ for comedic relief for some of his examples of what that interaction experience is going to look like. So clearly, that's going to be highly reliant on a data analytics side of things. So same as the last slide, but just see it geographically. What's cool about this graphic as it relates to a couple key data points is, I think we've heard here even early from Vertical Systems Group, I think we're number 1 now on the leaderboard for Metro Ethernet. Get this all straight, Ethernet US or domestic leaderboard, pretty proud of that. We end up, according to Frost and Sullivan, probably in close for first or tight for first or maybe second, so they're in that top 1 or 2 there. So the question you'll now ask with all of this first SOTP, some of the parts, is okay, so what? What are you going to do with it? So I'll attempt to answer some of that. And we'll take you to the next SOTP. So, go back in time now, a little bit of history lessons. So for those of you in the room, and I could ask for a show of hands, but I'm guessing there'll be a pretty good hands go up, which is, if you go back even pre-MEF 2.0, what were we talking about back then? We were talking about the connected exchange. This was pre-ENI, this was pre-E-access, a lot of those things. But what was interesting about the conversation back then, and whether Nan, Pascal, some of the folks would agree with me or not, I guess I'll find out after. A lot of that was pretty service provider focused, SP to SP, you know. But if you look at what we've accomplished, and when I say we, this is the level, you know, this is the level 3 into now CenturyLink, but the CenturyLink we, and obviously, you know, there's a whole bunch of other positive stories here in this audience around what we've done to leverage 1.0, 2.0, now even 3.0 to build that exchange. And you know what you see here and what we've built, and for us, this becomes the huge opportunity. And you know, one disclosure statement I should have mentioned at the beginning is I try to stay clear of the art of the possibility or imagine the possibility. So what I'm bringing you is the what's in place, you know, and I'll caveat for those things that are still a vision piece, but what's in place, what we've built. So what's on this connected global Ethernet exchange? I mean, it's, as you can read the data points yourself, whether it's hundreds of data centers, dozens of connected cloud partners, you know, hundreds of ENIs across the globe. You know, here shortly, get the CenturyLink cloud onto that piece for even the private side of things. And I mean, I won't read for you what you're already seeing up there, but you know, a couple, I'll call them sub SOTPs. Now it's sounding really weird. But what's embedded in here is kind of the combination of goodness of bringing these companies together. Another one is, and I mentioned a little bit, was just think cloud. So the CenturyLink side, the Savvis asset, a private managed, hosted, even ProServe managed private instance where, yes, they found some niche that needed a little bit more, call it white gloves treatment that an Amazon or others wouldn't provide. Great line of business there. You know, level 3 took a different stance, which was, you know what, we're not going to compete. We're going to partner with all these public guys, AWS, Azure, everybody else. So, you know, we built a connected exchange there. You know, great product or line of business by way of direct connects, and we've even added on to that dynamic capacity, dynamic connections, all kinds of things on top of that. So now imagine a whole new hybrid that we have over our global connected exchange for whether you're taking a workload from private, any one of those options I mentioned, to a public, do so on a network that's on demand for capacity and connections and other things to model those cloud consumption use cases. And that's really just the get started. And I'll give you one other sub SOTP, which is, in some of this we begin to ask ourselves, okay, were we lucky or just good by way of, you know, respective companies and what they're focused on. So, you know, from a former of a CenturyLink, that's error number one. So we have spent, you know, a ton of time working on the infrastructure side of it. So from an NFV, NFVI, the programmable services backbone, you know, announcements we've already put out there around Cord, you know, edge compute, other things. So that infrastructure that's been built, you know, on the flip side, you know, on the former of a level 3, who built a lot around control automation. So how do you more on-demand enable capacity connections, some virtual elements. So for us to bring that together, now that abstraction layer, you know, bolted onto the next generation of that network infrastructure, and now make that exposable, whether it's to legacy of IT systems, you know, front-ending, you know, UI, UX, what we'll do there, or combination customer-facing APIs. And I was telling some analysts earlier, I've literally got a dozen sub-SOTPs, so I could spend an hour and I won't. So the last one here. So, you know, we'll call this some of the parts for innovation. And, you know, what I'm highlighting here is we just rolled out an expansion or extension to our Cloud Connect offering. Again, everything I'm talking about here has been Ethernet-based. So that offering now, if you look at the bottom, so we had built dynamic capacity, we had built dynamic connections, and, you know, back to the theme of services, network services. We'd built an enhanced management as, you know, active, passive metrics that you can do programmability type options against them, some if, then, else actions. You know, we've got, and some others that aren't even on here, dynamic virtual private cloud, for instance, Amazon, you know, dynamic of an exchange connect, you know, much of this API front-ended, but if you think about that, what we just launched is literally with that Cloud Connect offering, a customer can go turn up a dynamic VLAN. They can do that, not just the connection piece, but there's API calls into that connected exchange, to that Amazon VPC. We can put on top of that a dynamic capacity that you can put in an alerts-driven or programmable boost stat based on a schedule or utilization or other things. And I think I added up before. It was like I don't know, 10 or 11 parts or services embedded to that one. But what's cool about this one, and hopefully for this audience, is it's a whole different vantage point or perspective as you look at services. And our overly used terminology, for us here, the notion of a microservice. But if you build those, reusable, consumable services wrapped with that right API or microservices layer, that you can make those available, and not just available in single fashion, but now into all the cases we're talking about that could be service chained, that could be stitched together in unique ways as we might expose them natively to a customer via an API or other things. And I mean, we've all, another one of our buzzwords around drag and drop, but other things for, service innovation. What we're building here is a platform where we'll actually be able to enable some of that. And, the other thing to mention here is, and we always have said this, is everything we're building here, we'll start with the operation in the factory in mind first to get network hands off, build operational scale. The great one around, what happens when automation breaks, make sure you have an intelligent workflow where you can catch that exception, that fallout, and get it to a human to fix something up before it takes off again. So anyways, my final here was, so that SOTP, that's some of the parts across the now broader network, that connected exchange that we're going to continue to layer capabilities and services on. And then lastly, how do you look at services in a whole new way and how you stitch those together to do something innovative? So that's all I've got.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you. So what I want to do now, first I'd make a few summary comments here, really, because just I had to be thinking about all the speakers going through this. But they all individually are great examples of what's happening, what service providers are going through, overall transformation, move to software, agile, new development, new organizations. I just want to pick a few things that just came to mind. One is, I remember it actually was 2013 when I started looking at SDN and what's happening with the industry. That one of my first thoughts was that network providers, like the three here, were going to have to become network SIs. That the only way they could do this and survive was to really understand how to become an SI for their network. And I remember coining the term, and then I know people thought I'm crazy, what are you talking about? But I think the story of what you've done is that you have become SIs for your own network now. And versus, let's say, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, where you might think about calling in an IBM, an Accenture to come in and do some of this tricky work that you're working on, almost to a one, most major providers have not done that. They've actually said, no, I don't want IBM to learn my game. I don't want any other big SI to figure this out, because they don't know my network like I know my network. They don't know my customers like I know my customers. So I think it's amazing that, quite honestly, now here we are 4 years later, every to a one, you've been able to become this network SI. Other quick points before we get to a few questions is automation. That wasn't talked about, until recently. I mean, every one of you mentioned automation not working. I don't remember a year ago here, 2 years ago definitely not, a year ago not so much. This idea of having to have automation along with all the other buzzwords of agile, DevOps, all that didn't really come into play. Good to see, I think that's a positive sign. Partnerships. Partnerships are deeper and wider than ever before. Every one of you mentioned numerous, let's say, partnerships that have gotten either deeper or wider. Either it's a new technology, think of IT, all different new technologies. I don't want to name one because there's so many different technologies, but also the fact that you now have to work with small and large providers. I'd say 5 years ago, there's a tendency to cut down your providers and vendors. And now you almost have to widen the scope and get deeper with your providers to make it happen and make it work. Then lastly, tagging on to Travis's circle of life, the term I like to use is continuous development. If you do this right, you realize once you offer and put something together, there's a continuous circle of improvement that happens. There's no start and finish anymore. So, for example, as you look at even things like MET 3.0 and the service they talk about, there's only the start of these services, and each individual service has its life cycle, but there's really kind of no end. You need to keep watching it to say, do you improve it, tweak it, add another service, improve it, tweak it, add another service, but at the same time, you somehow, I think, have to have this idea of continuous development. There's no beginning, no end. You're continually trying to figure out what's that right mix of the ingredients of that service to your enterprise customer. With that, we only have a few minutes, so I'm going to go right to one question and add in the second question so you can pick and choose which one you want to answer, because I think Steve got into the challenges area. So our first question was, what are the major challenges to make this kind of transformation, which you have hinted at in many cases, kind of Steve hit it right on, but you can tackle that about what are the major challenges, those real top ones. And then secondly, where do you see the early wins or progress? Early wins, progress, or breakthroughs you've seen that you would say is encouraging. So I'll start with Travis, and you can pick either challenges or breakthroughs.
So which of your lists, Steve, do we want to?
Any of them, they're all good.
You know, one that came up as I was thinking that through here real time was just even dev methodologies. So, you know, what's interesting is, you know, for those of us that have been developing closer to the network, you know, we can get into, and we use, you know, again, we've heard agile here, we heard it here last year, but if you look, you progress that to, you know, to more CI, CD, full DevOps, and what that means to how you operate, you know, we may be building on that pace where we can turn software around in a hurry, but those consuming apps and systems and readiness there by way of a traditional of a OSS and a BSS, I mean, there's special considerations there around, you know, are we now back to their pace? And even if they're monthly and we want to be weekly, I mean, that's something that's you know, we've got some efforts underway to change that and find a way to make that different. And obviously the role of an API and some of that will obviously help in terms of how you front end those services. But that's a piece. But even as it relates to dev methodology, and you brought it up, Mike, around partners, so on the SI side of things. So as we deconstruct that black box into bring your own hardware, operating system, you know, build, buy, open source your network function, and lead with open source across that, even on now with hardware options from TIP or others, you know, to think you're going to go it alone is a tall task. And there's all of a sudden a huge influx of providers, that next generation of suppliers, partners that are coming up. But to embrace that, two, how to leverage that with scale, and again, back to the circle reference, that life cycle consideration, that's where I think that those partnerships are key. But those, you know, to get to everything I just described maybe sounds easy, but it's a tall task for us folks who've not been in the you know, supplier build type mode, and now we are.
Yeah. I'm sorry, you made me think about this whole idea of fast failing. Sounds wonderful. It's a little frustrating, though, if this fast fail turns into 3 or 4 failures in a row. I'm sorry. I don't know why I thought about that, but Steve, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the challenge I didn't really talk about, which now Travis made me think through, which I think is really the next challenge that we're going to have to deal with, right? I think the technology's evolving, APIs are evolving. We will be able to do a lot more than we can do today in months or weeks. That stuff is coming together rapidly. I think the big challenge is the business process behind it, right? And how do we think through as technology leaders, how do we bring that business process component to the technology that we have and make sure it's great that we can have an API that someone can use, but how do we make sure that API is doing all of the billing, all of the network activation, and all of the business process pieces that need to happen to make sure that we're really enabling the services we need to. That's the next, I think, big challenge for us.
All right, thanks. Jean-Claude, I'm sorry.
Just to add on the challenges, but yes, the technology is sort of progressing and being addressed, but speed is of the essence. Because if the vendors or the suppliers are not there in time, we are investing in legacy. And then once the technology is there, maybe later rather than sooner, then it's going to be even difficult because you're going to have to wait until that financial setup has been exhausted because you have depreciation and all of that, because companies are not run by technology people, also run by financial people. So it's important to speed up the clock in order not to end up in a situation where we keep on investing in legacy while we're building the future in parallel. Another challenge is this, the mindset. We're a traditional telco in a sense. We're also German at the roots. And then we aim to find all possibilities of breakage before we design something. So then you have an organization that is used to producing a platform over 18 months or 2 years. And some of the deadlines I hear sometimes are like, I've never heard of something like that. But then it's bulletproof. Everything will work once you launch. And as we become more, as you said, SI-oriented people, as we focus more on constant development, constant integration, now we're launching this concept of minimal viable product to try and change the mindset in the organization that you can't think of every single possibility before you go out. We're not building a double-decker plane here. We need to be fast into the market. So that's going to be also key, at least in our case, and I think this would apply to any traditional telco, to get that mindset going, to become really agile. And because of that, you said, why aren't we going to Accenture and IBM? Because we're becoming IT companies, and the nature of what we're doing now, the development is tied into operations. So how do you separate? Do you give IBM one piece, or are they going to do all of it? If they're going to do all of it, then what are we doing then? So it's important for us to be skilled. Yes, we could use IBM or others in instances, but I think it's more important to look at disruptors. You mentioned smaller companies, partnerships, collaboration, because I don't think anybody can do it on their own. This is one big task that requires the brains of a lot of people, the experience of a lot of people.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense, actually. And some of the research Ovum tracks kind of these large IT contracts, and what's happening is there aren't that many large IT contracts, just at a high level. It's more point projects to solve a particular problem now. And this is basically all verticals, but it's still, you see that trend of more spot need. In this case, it could be a problem you're having on a technology or one part of the platform, but you don't have someone being overall the whole platform as an example, which makes a lot of sense. So some of you didn't hit like the great wins. I'd like to lift up, so what's happened that's really progressed? I think, Steve, in your presentation, I thought which was interesting was this organizational shift that had to happen, and almost organizational structure and almost culture, that you change names and titles, which is challenging enough, but then the working relationship across different silos and disciplinary actions. And again, coming from the large telco like myself, we had plenty of fiefdoms. We had plenty of silos. We had plenty of people in charge of one part of the organization and one function. So in the days of me being a product manager, I mean, going across to operations and IT and then network and trying to develop a product, it did take 18 months, by the way. So it was an 18-month process to get that all done. I had to get representatives from every organization, try to get their buy-in, consensus. It took a long time, but I share that just to say, so what's radically changed that really is kind of, to me, a win, because I think that's a huge win for that us. Was that organizational shift, culture change, DevOps, learning how to develop, living with a minimal product. That's just like, whoa, that's a lot of action. So in your own groups, I guess, where do you see things that really have positively surprised you, these early wins along the way? Any one of you, I guess, I'll open up to.
Well, I would just say I have been surprised. Making that organizational shift and a development process that supports an agile framework with cross-functional teams, I mean, that I can't emphasize enough how interesting it's been to watch teams form, right? Certainly for some of the team members that we brought into that process, I think they wanted to kill me. But as soon as they saw success in that over and over and over again, they were delivering on expectations and delivering real value to the business, that started to change how fast and how excited they were about being part of a team and delivering things, every 3 weeks, every 2 weeks, right? Whatever their cycle was, to watch that change was huge, rather than going off into a lab and coming out 6 months later saying, success, right? They show that success every couple of weeks. And it's that change and that cultural move has been huge.
Yeah. Any others? I mean, I know Jean-Claude, I mean, quite honestly, Deutsche Telekom started this early and was probably doing a lot of stuff behind the scenes I don't even know where about, but it just seems like through that early work you did, there had to be some like...
I mean, we've gained a lot of wins, or we learned a lot about the technology itself, especially from an infrastructure point of view. And recently we've been learning more and more about the higher layers, because we're a telco and we're trying to make sure that there's sustainability and longevity for basic telco services before we add other sophisticated services like rich communication suite and all that to compete with OTT suppliers. But then the learnings and the experiences and the challenges we faced in building cloud-based technologies has driven the need to actually make an organizational change and mindset change. This is where this minimum viable product is coming from. So we see that as a big success, that by dealing with this cloud environment is driving sort of is an eye opener, and is driving a real change in the way we're going to work. What kind of people we need to have in roles and tasks, similar to Steve's presentation. We're going through that right now.
Yeah, that sounds like great. And Travis, I'm going to let you end, because what I'm going to put towards you is what I see for you as kind of one of the major wins is the early work that started at Time Warner Telecom that got to this idea of an open platform network platform that's now survived, and I think going to survive 2 mergers. So it started there early on at TW Telecom, which is now CenturyLink. But I think you were the early ones to talk about this idea of a platform and a customer-defined network. So just a few words on that, which I think has now survived the test of time and 2 mergers.
Yeah, I'll use different verbiage than survived. I mean, I think with every acquisition or every change there, back to that SOTP reference, there's been other goodness we've been able to bring into the mix. So, the other one you just brought up by way of, we brought, actually, I think we coined that term here a year ago, customer-defined networking, where it's not enough to say single pane of glass. You got to give a customer the ability to say, you know what, if then else, have some programmability competes against data-rich analytics, and allow them to say, if this happens, take control action. If this happens, tell me. If this happens, take human action. That type of a mindset, because frankly, a lot of people don't want to swivel to the portal every time they want to do something. So, but with that type, an extension of that, and back to the cultural theme here, going to answer the questions around, even from a strategic mindset perspective, that customer-defined networking, how about customer-defined experience, where it's not just a day one thing. Look at the day 2 piece of it around, here's what I want my network or my provider or whatever the ecosystem is to do if this happens, around custom of a subscription type of model for how you want to be notified. What does repair automation look like for you? Some of those types of things. And then, I'd even say just on the whole digital interaction piece. I mean, some of the examples that Shettle brought up this morning, talking about Siri and some of these cognitive AI, other things. I mean, we're not that far off from having a model where if we can, more intelligently harvest and make actionable and usable all that data that we're pulling in to do something, more secret sauce on that front end to change a customer experience. I mean, the strategic mindset of our leaders that's already woven into this go forward CenturyLink definitely has a mind on all those things. So,
well, thank you very much. Thank the panel, please. I think your time's up. It's time for lunch, but thank you all very much, and thank you for.